My name is Frank. I'm 53 now, but this all started back when I was 41. For most of my adult life, I've been a land surveyor. It's a good trade. It gets you outside, keeps you honest. You learn to read the land, to notice things other people walk right past. The subtle dip that means an old creek bed, the change in tree growth that marks a property line from 100 years ago. You develop a certain kind of sight, and you learn what's normal. The sounds, the smells, the way the woods are supposed to feel. That's the part that's important here. I've spent more time in the deep woods of Michigan than most folks spend in their own backyards. I thought I knew them. I thought I understood the rules. I was wrong. I'm telling this now because my wife, Sarah, thinks I should. She says carrying it alone for so long is what gives me the shakes sometimes when the sun goes down. Maybe she's right. I don't know. I'm not looking for belief, and I'm definitely not looking for fame. I just need to put it down from start to finish, exactly as it happened. What you do with it is your own business. It sounds impossible. I know that. If you'd told me this story 12 years ago, I'd have bought you a beer and told you to lay off the hard stuff. But it happened. Twice. Before I get into what happened, if you're new here, consider subscribing. I share stories like this regularly. And drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. I always like to know who's listening. All right, let me tell you what happened. The first time was in October of 2011. The air had that sharp, clean bite to it. The kind that tells you winter isn't just coming, it's right around the corner. The leaves were mostly down, which makes our job easier. We were working a contract for the state, remarking the boundaries of a big, forgotten parcel of public land that abutted the Manistee National Forest. It was the kind of place that's easy to get lost in if you don't have a compass and a good map. Rolling hills, thick stands of old-growth oak and maple, and swamps that could swallow a truck. We were a two-man crew, me and a young guy named Kevin. He was fresh out of school, smart, eager to learn. Good kid. We'd been out there for 3 days already, working from sunup to sundown, leapfrogging our way along the survey line with the tripod and the prism pole. It was routine work, tedious even. The ground was damp from a morning frost that hadn't quite burned off yet, and the air smelled of wet leaves and cold earth. A good smell, a normal smell. We parked the company truck, a beat-to-hell Ford F-250, on an old two-track that had mostly been reclaimed by nature. From there, it was about a mile hike into our starting point for the day. The woods were alive that morning. Squirrels were chattering like mad. A couple of pileated woodpeckers were hammering away on a dead oak, and we saw a whole flock of turkeys making their way across a ridge. Everything was exactly as it should be. We set up our gear. I took my first reading through the total station, and we got to work. For a few hours, the only sounds were our boots crunching in the leaves, the electronic beep of the equipment, and me calling out numbers to Kevin. It was around 1 in the afternoon when things started to feel off. It wasn't one big thing, but a collection of small things that just didn't sit right. The first thing I noticed was the silence. It didn't happen all at once. It was a slow fade, like someone was turning down the volume on the world. The squirrels stopped chattering. The woodpeckers went quiet. Even the little chickadees that are always flitting around seemed to have vanished. 1 minute the woods were full of life, and the next they were holding their breath. I remember stopping and looking over at Kevin. He was standing with the prism pole about 100 yards away, and he was looking around too, with a funny expression on his face. I waved to see if he was okay, and he just gave a little shrug. We kept working, but the quiet was heavy. It was the kind of silence that makes the hairs on your arms stand up. You feel it more than you hear it. A little while later, as we moved the line forward, we crossed a game trail. There were fresh deer tracks in the damp soil, lots of them. But there was something wrong. The tracks were deep, splayed out, like the deer had been running flat out, and they all went in one direction, away from the area we were heading into. Then, in the middle of the trail, the tracks just stopped. Not faded out, but ended, as if a dozen deer had been running for their lives and were suddenly lifted straight up into the air. Kevin came over to look. "What do you make of that, Frank?" he asked. His voice was a little shaky. I didn't have an answer. I tried to come up with one. "Maybe a pack of coyotes spooked them," I said. "Maybe they jumped a gully we can't see." But I didn't believe it. There was no gully, and coyotes don't hunt like that. Then we smelled it. It came on the breeze, faint at first, then stronger. It was a thick, greasy smell, like a wet dog that had rolled in something dead. But it was worse than that. There was a chemical, coppery tang to it, like old blood. It made the back of my throat itch. I've smelled dead animals before. I've smelled bear, coyote, everything that lives in these woods. This was none of those things. This was something else. Something wrong. Kevin looked like he was going to be sick. "That's it," he said. "I'm done. Let's pack it in." Normally I would have told him to tough it out, that we had a job to do. But I felt it too. A deep, primal knot of fear tightening in my gut. The part of your brain that's still a lizard was screaming at me to run. "All right," I said, my own voice sounding tight. "Let's head back to the truck." We started packing up the gear, moving with a quiet urgency. We didn't talk. Every snap of a twig under our boots sounded like a gunshot in the dead silence. The smell was stronger now, clinging to the damp air. It felt like it was coming from a low-lying, swampy area just ahead of us, right where our survey line was supposed to go. I kept my eyes on the trees, scanning the shadows, trying to make sense of the feeling of being watched. It was a physical sensation, like a pressure on the back of my neck. I've been a hunter my whole life. I know the difference between being alone in the woods and being watched. We were being watched. We had the tripod folded up, and I was strapping it to my pack when we heard the first sound that wasn't us. It was a heavy thump-thump, the sound of something massive moving through the underbrush. But it wasn't the clumsy crash of a deer or a bear. It was measured, deliberate. It was bipedal. My blood ran cold. I looked at Kevin. His eyes were wide as dinner plates. He just pointed with a trembling finger into the thicket. I froze, squinting, trying to see what he was pointing at. And then I saw it. A flicker of movement. Something dark and tall, moving between the trees about 70 yards away. It was paralleling us, keeping to the shadows. My first thought, my brain desperately trying to find a box to put this in, was that it was a man. A big man in a dark coat. Maybe a poacher who didn't want to be seen. But he was too big. Way too big. And he was moving too fast, too smoothly for any human. He wasn't making any noise either, besides those 2 heavy footfalls we'd heard. I grabbed Kevin's arm. "Let's go," I whispered. "Now. Don't run, just walk. Fast." We turned and started heading back the way we came, toward the 2-track where the truck was parked. I didn't look back, not at first. I was too scared. I could feel those unseen eyes burning into my spine. The silence was broken by another sound now, a low, guttural noise that seemed to vibrate in my chest. It was a growl, but not like any dog or bear I'd ever heard. It was deeper, more resonant. It sounded conversational, like a warning. That's when I made the mistake of looking over my shoulder. It had stepped out of the trees and was standing at the edge of the clearing we had just left. It was just standing there, watching us, And it wasn't a man. It wasn't a bear. My mind simply refused to process what I was seeing. It stood on two legs. They were long, powerfully muscled, but bent backwards at the knee joint like a dog's. It had to be at least 7.5 feet tall, maybe taller. Its whole body was covered in thick, matted fur, the color of charcoal and mud. Its arms were long, too long for its body, and they ended in what looked like hands. Big, clawed hands, but with fingers and an opposable thumb. It was broad in the shoulders, like a bodybuilder, but lean in the waist. But the head, that was the part that broke my brain. It was the head of a wolf, a massive nightmare version of a wolf. The muzzle was long and tapered, lined with yellowed teeth that I could see even from that distance. The ears were pointed and stood erect, swiveling independently to track sounds. And the eyes were what got me. They weren't animal eyes. They weren't just reflecting the light. They were glowing, a faint amber-yellow light, like the last embers of a fire. And they were filled with a terrifying, undeniable intelligence. It was looking right at me, not just seeing me, but looking at me, sizing me up. There was no malice in its expression, no overt aggression, just cold, calculating appraisal. It tilted its head slightly, as if curious. A puff of steam came from its nostrils in the cold air. The world seemed to slow down. I could hear my own heart hammering against my ribs. I could feel the rough fabric of my jacket, the weight of the pack on my shoulders. Time stretched out. It felt like we stood there for a minute, locked in this impossible staring contest. But it was probably only a few seconds. My surveyor's brain, the part of me that measures and observes, was taking in details, even as the rest of me was screaming in pure terror. The fur was patchy in places, showing gray, leathery skin underneath. There was a scar running down its left forearm. It smelled of rot and wet fur, and something metallic that I now recognized as blood. This wasn't a costume. This wasn't a trick of the light. This was a living, breathing thing that shouldn't exist, and it was real. Kevin made a small, choked sound next to me, and that broke the spell. The creature's eyes flicked to him, and it took a half-step forward. The movement was fluid, impossibly fast, a predator's grace. That's what finally got my legs to work. I grabbed Kevin's collar and yanked him. "Move," I hissed, my voice cracking. We started walking backwards, away from it. I kept my eyes locked on the creature, terrified that if I looked away, it would charge. It didn't. It just stood there, watching us retreat. It followed us for a few steps, its head low, then stopped again at the edge of the clearing. It was letting us go. Or maybe it was just enjoying the show. Every step was an agony of suspense. My feet kept catching on roots and rocks I couldn't see. I could hear Kevin stumbling and panting beside me. The mile back to the truck felt like a marathon. The whole time, I could feel its presence behind us, a weight in the now silent woods. I didn't dare look back again. I was afraid of what I'd see, or worse, what I wouldn't see. The fear of it being gone was somehow more terrifying than the fear of it being there. At least when I could see it, I knew where it was. The silence was absolute. No birds, no squirrels, just the crunch of our own boots and the ragged sound of our breathing. Finally, through the trees, I saw the dull white of the F-250. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. "Don't run," I told Kevin again, though my own legs were screaming to sprint. Running triggers a predator's instinct. I knew that much. We reached the truck, fumbling with the doors. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. I threw the expensive survey equipment into the passenger seat without a second thought. Kevin scrambled in his side, slamming and locking the door. I cranked the engine. The old diesel protested for a second, then roared to life. The sound was deafening in the quiet woods, a beautiful mechanical intrusion into that nightmare. I slammed the truck into reverse, not caring about the saplings I was running over, and spun it around on the narrow track. As I put it in drive and stomped on the gas, I glanced in the rearview mirror. It was standing in the middle of the two-track, right where we had been parked. It hadn't moved to chase us. It was just watching us leave. Its amber eyes seemed to glow, even in the daylight. Then the trees blocked the view, and it was gone. We didn't slow down until we hit the paved county road 5 miles later. We drove for 20 minutes in complete silence. The only sound was the hum of the tires on the asphalt and Kevin's quiet, ragged sobs. I just gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white, staring straight ahead. My mind was a looping replay of what I'd seen. The dog legs, the hands, the intelligent, glowing eyes. I was trying to find a rational explanation, any explanation at all, and coming up with nothing. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a man in a suit. It was something else. Finally, Kevin spoke. "You saw it too, right?" he whispered. "I'm not crazy?" "I saw it," I said. My voice was hoarse. "What was it, Frank?" "I don't know." And I didn't. I had no name for it then. I had never heard the stories, never read the reports. I was a blank slate, and what I had seen was impossible. "We have to tell someone," Kevin said, his voice gaining a bit of strength. "The police, the DNR." I thought about it. I really did. I imagined walking into the sheriff's office in that small northern town. I pictured the look on the deputy's face as I tried to describe a 7-foot-tall wolf man we saw in the woods. They'd think we were drunk, or high, or just plain crazy. They'd laugh us out of the station. "No," I said finally. "We tell no one. Who would believe us? They'll say it was a bear. They'll say we were seeing things. We'll lose our jobs, Kevin. They'll think we're unstable." He didn't argue. He knew I was right. We made a pact right there, on that empty road, to never speak of it again. We finished the contract by working around that section of the parcel, lying on the report that the terrain was too swampy to get an accurate reading. It was the only time I ever falsified a survey in my life. Kevin quit a month later. He said he was moving downstate to take an office job. He couldn't handle being in the woods anymore. I never saw him again. I tried to forget. For years, I mostly succeeded. I buried it deep. I told myself it was a trick of the light, a hallucination brought on by stress and the strange, quiet woods. A waking nightmare. I got on with my life. I worked, I paid my mortgage, I watched my kids grow up. But it was always there, a dark shape at the edge of my memory. Every time I was alone in the woods, I'd feel that old familiar pressure on the back of my neck. I'd find myself scanning the tree line, my hand hovering near the hatchet on my belt. I never felt truly alone in the woods again. Then, 9 years later, it happened again. And this time, it was at my home. After that day with Kevin, I developed a deep-seated need for open spaces. We had been living in a house surrounded by woods, a nice place, but after 2011, I started to feel claustrophobic there. The rustle of leaves at night would send a jolt of ice through my veins. The way shadows fell across the lawn looked all wrong. So in 2018, we moved. We bought a small farmhouse on 40 acres out in the flatlands of the Thumb. It was mostly fields, corn and soybeans, with just one small 10-acre woodlot at the far back of the property. I could see for miles in every direction. It felt safe. For 2 years it was. I started to relax. I convinced myself the thing in the Manistee Forest was a one-time anomaly, a weird fluke I'd never see again. I was wrong. It was a Saturday night in late September of 2020. A storm was rolling in from the west. The air was thick and heavy, and the sky was a bruised purple color. Sarah and I were just finishing dinner, watching the lightning flash silently in the distance. We had a dog back then, a good old golden retriever named Gus. Gus was 13, mostly deaf, and spent 99% of his time sleeping on the rug in the living room. That night, though, he was agitated. He kept pacing between the front door and the big picture window, whining low in his throat, his hackles raised. I tried to calm him down. "It's just the storm, old boy," I told him, scratching his ears. But he wouldn't settle. He'd never been afraid of storms before. That should have been my first clue. Around 10 o'clock, the wind picked up, rattling the windows in their frames. The rain started, a few fat drops at first, then a full-on deluge. Gus suddenly let out a single sharp bark, and then tucked his tail between his legs and scrambled under the kitchen table, shivering. "What in the world is wrong with him?" Sarah asked, looking concerned. I didn't have an answer. A moment later, we heard it. A sound from outside, over the drumming of the rain. It was a crash, followed by the metallic screech of twisting metal. It came from the direction of the barn, about 100 yards from the house. My first thought was that the wind had torn a piece of the tin roof off. "Damn it," I said, getting up from the table. "I better go see what that was." "Frank, don't," Sarah said, grabbing my arm. "It's pouring. It can wait until morning." But I'm the kind of guy who can't let things go. I have to know. I grabbed my big maglite from the drawer and a heavy rain slicker from the hook by the door. "I'll just take a quick look," I told her. "Probably nothing." I stepped out onto the back porch and was immediately hit by a wall of wind and rain. The night was pitch black beyond the small circle of light from our porch lamp. I clicked on the maglite, its powerful beam cutting a path through the storm. And I smelled it again, the same smell from 9 years before. Wet dog, decay, and old blood. It was so strong it made me gag. My heart instantly started hammering in my chest. No, not here. It can't be. My brain was screaming at me to go back inside, to lock the door and call the police. But the part of me that needed to protect my home, my wife, pushed me forward. I stepped off the porch, the beam of my flashlight cutting jerky circles in the darkness as I walked toward the barn. The mud sucked at my boots. The rain was cold on my face. Halfway to the barn, my light caught something. The heavy steel gate to the sheep pen, which I always kept chained and padlocked, was bent and twisted, torn clean off its hinges. It was lying in the mud, 20 feet from the post. No wind could do that. No person could do that without a cutting torch or a tractor. And then I saw them. The sheep. They were huddled in the far corner of the pen, packed together so tightly they looked like one shivering white mass. But they were all there. None of them were missing. It hadn't come for the livestock. So what did it want? I swept the light across the front of the barn, and my blood turned to ice. The big sliding barn door, made of 2-inch thick oak, had 3 massive parallel gouges running down it, splintering the wood. It looked like a giant bear had swiped at it, but the marks were too deep, too clean. And standing there, in the shadow of the barn's overhang, just out of the worst of the rain, was a figure. It was crouched down, its back to me. It was huge, dark, and drenched. It was working at something on the ground. I couldn't see what. Slowly, it stood up. It unfolded itself, rising to its full, terrifying height. It turned its head, and the beam of my flashlight caught its eyes. Amber, glowing. It was the same creature, or another one just like it. It let out a low growl that I felt in the soles of my feet, a sound that cut right through the roar of the storm. It took a step toward me, and this time there was no curiosity in its eyes, only cold, predatory menace. My body reacted before my mind did. I didn't scream. I didn't even breathe. I just turned and ran. I abandoned all pretense of bravery, all thought of confronting it. I ran, slipping and sliding in the mud, my lungs on fire, the maglite bouncing wildly and showing me nothing but a chaotic blur of rain and darkness. I could hear it behind me. The heavy, rhythmic pounding of its footfalls was gaining on me. It was so much faster than me. I felt a hot, foul breath on the back of my neck, and I braced for the impact, for the claws to tear into my back. Just as I reached the back porch, I tripped on the bottom step and went down hard, sprawling onto the wooden planks. The maglite flew from my hand and skittered into the darkness. I scrambled around on my hands and knees, expecting to be dragged back into the storm. But nothing happened. I looked back, and it was standing at the edge of the lawn, just beyond the reach of the porch light. It had stopped. It wouldn't step into the light. It just stood there in the pouring rain, a monstrous silhouette against the blackness, its glowing eyes fixed on me. It huffed, a sound of frustration, and I could see the muscles in its shoulders bunch and relax. The screen door flew open, and Sarah was there. "Frank, get in here!" she screamed, her face pale with terror. She had seen it. She had seen the whole thing from the kitchen window. I crab-walked backward up the steps and through the door, and she slammed it shut behind me, fumbling with the deadbolt. We both stood there, panting, leaning against the door as if our combined weight could keep it out. We heard a single, heavy thump against the outside of the house, near the window. Then another. It was circling the house, testing it. We ran to the living room and looked out the front picture window. It was on the front porch now, its huge, dark form silhouetted by the lightning. It was sniffing at the door, its long muzzle pressed against the glass of the storm door. Then it raised one of its clawed hands and slowly, deliberately, tried the doorknob. It turned it back and forth, a clear, intelligent, and utterly terrifying action. When the locked knob didn't give, it let out a frustrated snort and pressed its face against the window, its amber eyes staring right into the house, right at us. Its breath fogged the glass. I could see its features clearly in the flashes of lightning, the wet, black fur plastered to its skull, the leathery lips pulled back in a silent snarl, revealing long, yellow canines. The intelligence was there again, but this time it was mixed with a chilling, predatory focus. It knew we were in there. It was trying to figure out how to get to us. Sarah was crying silently, her hand over her mouth. I grabbed her and pulled her away from the window, down the hall to our bedroom. I told her to call 911. While she was on the phone, her voice shaking as she tried to explain to the dispatcher that someone, or something, was trying to break into our house. I grabbed my 12-gauge shotgun from the closet. I loaded it with buckshot, my hands trembling so much I almost dropped the shells. I could hear scraping sounds along the side of the house, the sound of claws dragging against the vinyl siding. Then, a loud bang from the back of the house as it tested the kitchen window. I stood in the hallway, my back to the bedroom where Sarah was, the shotgun pointed at the front door. I was ready to die to protect my wife. I wasn't going to let that thing get to her. The minutes stretched into an eternity. The scraping stopped. The rain began to lessen. And then, far off, I heard the faint sound of a siren. The creature must have heard it too. There was one last, furious sound, a deep, guttural roar of frustration that shook the whole house. It wasn't a growl this time. It was a vocalization, a roar of pure rage. Then silence. When the sheriff's deputy finally arrived 20 minutes later, the storm had passed. The night was quiet again, except for the dripping of water from the eaves. There was no sign of the creature. The deputy was a young guy, looked like he was barely out of his teens. He came to the door cautiously, his hand on his sidearm. I met him on the porch, the shotgun still in my hands, which I quickly and carefully set down. Sarah was trying to explain what happened, but she was borderline hysterical. I took over, trying my best to sound calm and rational, leaving out the more impossible details. I told him a very large animal, probably a bear, had been trying to get into our house. I showed him the bent gate, the gouges on the barn door, the scrape marks on the siding, and the fogged-up print of its nose and mouth on the front window. He took it all in, his face a mask of professional skepticism. He got on his radio and called for animal control, but was told they wouldn't come out for a bear sighting unless it was a recurring problem. He walked the property with his flashlight. He found tracks, huge tracks, in the mud near the barn. They were canine, sort of, but they were all wrong. They were too big, for one thing, and the stride was enormous. What really got him, though, was that in several places it looked like the creature had been walking on 2 feet. The tracks were deep, showing immense weight. He just stood there for a long time, shining his light on them. "Never seen anything like that," he mumbled, more to himself than to me. "The gate's all wrong for a bear." In his official report, he wrote it up as damage by unknown animal, possibly a large black bear. He told us to keep our doors locked and to call if we saw it again. And then he left. We were alone again in the quiet house. We didn't sleep that night. We sat in the living room with all the lights on, the shotgun across my lap, until the sun came up. The next day, I reinforced every door and window in the house. I installed motion sensor floodlights that could illuminate the whole property. I bought a bigger gun, but I knew none of it would really matter if that thing decided it wanted to get in. Sarah was never the same after that night. She wouldn't go outside after dark. She made me sell the last of our sheep. We never talked about what we really saw. We just called it the bear. But we both knew. We both knew it wasn't a bear. The second encounter was worse than the first. The first time, it was in its world. We were the intruders. The second time, it came into our world. It crossed a line. It came to our home. It tested our doors. It looked into our windows. It wasn't just a wild animal. It was a trespasser, a stalker. It felt personal. That's what haunts me the most. I started doing research after that. Late at night, when Sarah was asleep, I'd go online. I typed in 7-foot wolfman in Michigan, creature with dog legs, glowing amber eyes. I expected to find nothing but crackpot websites and cheesy horror stories. Instead, I found hundreds of reports. Stories from all over the state, all over the country, going back decades. People describing the exact same thing I saw. The same height, the same charcoal fur, the same backward bent legs, the same intelligent, glowing eyes. They called it the Dogman. The name sounded silly, like something from a B-movie. But the stories weren't silly. They were told by hunters, by fishermen, by cops, by ordinary people who had stumbled across something impossible in the deep woods and had their lives changed forever. Reading those accounts was both terrifying and a strange kind of relief. It meant I wasn't crazy. It meant Kevin wasn't crazy. It meant what Sarah and I saw was real. But it also meant these things were out there. Not just one, but maybe many. What are they? I have no idea. Are they some undiscovered primate, a relic from a bygone age? Are they something supernatural, a spirit or a demon from old legends? Are they some kind of government experiment gone wrong? I've heard all the theories. None of them seem to fit. The thing I saw, both times, was too biological to be a ghost, but too intelligent and malevolent to be just an animal. The way it moved, the way it thought, the way it looked at me, it was something else entirely. It lives in the space between the world we know and the world we're afraid to imagine. The experience has changed me. I don't survey in the deep woods anymore. I stick to subdivisions and city lots now. I sold the farmhouse a year after the second encounter. We live in town now, with streetlights and neighbors close by. I still feel safer, but the fear never really goes away. It's a low-level hum in the back of my mind. Every time I hear a strange noise at night, or see a shadow move at the edge of my vision, the memory comes rushing back. The smell, the silence, the glowing amber eyes. I think about why it let me and Kevin go that first day. And I think about why it came to my house 9 years later. Was it the same one? Did it remember me? Did I cross some line, violate some territory that day that made it hold a grudge? I'll never know. That uncertainty is the hardest part to live with. So why am I telling this now? Because holding it in feels like a poison. For years it was my secret shame, my private nightmare. Sharing it doesn't make it less terrifying, but it makes it less lonely. It's a testimony. I'm bearing witness to something I saw. I have no proof. The tracks the deputy saw are long gone, washed away by the rain. I have no photos, no physical evidence. All I have is my word, and the memory that is burned into my mind like a brand. I know there will be people who don't believe me, people who will say I was mistaken, that I was lying, that I was crazy. That's fine. I probably would have been one of them 12 years ago. But I'm not telling this for the skeptics. I'm telling this for the other people out there who have seen it, the ones who have had their own encounters, who have been stared down by those same amber eyes, and have been living with the silent terror ever since. I want them to know they're not alone. And I'm telling this as a warning. The world is not as safe and known as you think it is. There are still dark places on the map, and things that live in the shadows. Most people will go their whole lives without ever looking behind the curtain. But once in a while, someone stumbles into the wrong place at the wrong time, and they see what's really there. If you find yourself in the deep woods and the birds suddenly go silent, trust that feeling in your gut. Don't try to be brave. Don't try to rationalize it. Just leave. Go back to your car. Go back to the safety of the light and the noise of the human world. Because there are things out there older and stronger than us. They watch us from the trees, and most of the time they are content to just watch. But not always. The last thing I'll say is this. The image that haunts me the most isn't of the creature running or growling or showing its teeth. It's that moment on my front porch, in the middle of the storm, when it reached out with that clawed, impossibly human-like hand and calmly, intelligently tried to open my door.